Mark. Go.
So I was out here collecting some zucchini for lunch, and noticed that we have some mushrooms coming up, fungi. These are actually more closely related to animals than they are to plants, but since they're stuck in the ground like plants, we often teach them in botany courses rather than on their own or in animal-based courses. So I'm just going to pull a couple of these up and talk about their mode of metabolism and then the reproduction. So one thing that's interesting about fungi is they have cell walls like plants, but the cell wall is made out of chitin instead of cellulose. It's very similar, except it has nitrogen in it. Plant cells only have cellulose, which has no nitrogen. And these fungi, they're heterotrophic, which means unlike plants, they can't capture energy from the sun and do photosynthesis to make their own organic chemistry. So they have to get their organic chemistry in one of two ways. The first way is through decomposition. So when you see a mushroom like this is what we call the fruiting body. This is the reproductive structure. And what you can't see is down in the soil, a massive network of hyphae, little microscopic threads that are going all throughout the soil. It's massive. So the hyphal network is probably 1,000 times more weight than the fruiting body itself. And those little hyphal threads in the soil release enzymes that digest the organic matter in the soil. So this is decomposed plant material. It's dark. And the reason these mushrooms are growing here is because two reasons. We put compost out in our flower beds a couple of years ago. And so they're digesting, decomposing the organic matter in the compost and extracting simple sugars from that to grow their tissues. The other reason they're growing right here is because they have some shade from the shrub, and then our sprinkler system overshoots and the soil here is really wet. So it's wet, it has plenty of organic matter that the mushroom can decompose and break down. The other way that these fungi can get sugar to feed themselves is by entering into a symbiotic relationship with plant roots. So what will happen is these microscopic threads, these networks, instead of releasing enzymes and breaking down the organic chemistry in the soil, they'll go and infect the plant roots. And the plants allow this. The plants send out a signal into the soil looking for compatible forms of fungi that will enter into this relationship with them. And the plant root will allow the fungus to infect its root, and then this massive fungal network that's microscopic, much smaller than the finest plant roots, then explores all of the soil, including the tiniest soil spaces that plant roots can't get into, and captures the water and nutrients and transports them and gives them to the plant. And it's water and nutrients that limit the growth of plants. In exchange for that, the plant is doing photosynthesis with that water and nutrients and sending the sugars from photosynthesis in the leaves back down to the roots and is giving some of that sugar to the fungus. And so this is what we call a root symbiosis, symbiotic relationship between a plant and fungi. My guess is that this fungus right here is just a saprophytic fungus, which means it is releasing enzymes and decomposing the organic matter in the soil. But there are plenty of mycorrhizal fungi around that enter into these symbiotic root relationships. 90% of plant species on Earth do mycorrhizal associations with fungus, and so it tells you how important that actually is. The last thing I wanted to talk about is reproduction, sexual reproduction in fungi. And I'm going to take one of these. This one is more opened. This is a gill fungus, and you can see that spores are produced on gills. And there are other types of mushrooms that have pores instead of gills. But if we look at this, if you went in here, it looks like pages in a book, and you magnified it with a microscope, you would see that they have these spores in there. And as the spores are mature, they release, and they go all over the environment. Every day you breathe, you're breathing in a lot of these spores. They're everywhere in the environment. And when those spores find the right environment for growth, they'll germinate and then develop into more of these microscopic hyphae networks that grow in the soil. So fungi reproduce sexually, just like animals and plants, but they don't produce sperm and egg. What they do is these hyphae, different we don't call them male female, we call them plus minus mating strains, grow independently in the soil. They're different genetics, and what will happen is when two networks grow together, these hyphae strands will grow and connect with each other, and then the DNA of each of the plus and minus strain will then be combined, and then that will become a diploid set of DNA from each of the parent strains, and then that will grow up and become one of these. So this is a diploid fungus with a DNA from a plus and minus mating strain that formed down here under the soil and then grew up into these mushrooms, and then they go through meiosis to produce haploid spores that get dispersed in the environment and grow haploid hyphal networks. And one more thing to be very careful about eating mushrooms. I love mushrooms, but there are types of mushrooms that are very poisonous and that will kill you, including some that look exactly like these. They're a little bit different. They're called amanitas, the destroying angel. They look beautiful and delicious, but if you eat them, they'll destroy your kidney and liver function, and people die from eating mushrooms.